HuHa 2, ha!
Happy Harry's HuHa 2 Hi!
Hello and welcome to Happy Harry's HuHa 2 How-Tos, Episode 5, or Episode V, if you're a buffoon. And today we're going to be looking at human locomotion, human actions like running and jumping, kind of full body stuff here. We've already looked at the basics of character animation, how we go about roughing out the action that we'd like to animate, and then deciding on extreme positions, and then drawing breakdown images and in-between images to give us that kind of smooth look. But we haven't really looked at the functionality and the logic behind how humans move the way they do, which is vitally important if you're going to be animating anything vaguely humanoid. Most people might want to at some point animate animals as well, and we will come to that, or at least we'll talk about it a little bit later on. But before I get into today's lesson, I would like to tell you guys that I'm not actually animating with Adobe Flash CS6 today. No, sir, I am rocking the boat. I've really turned things on their heads and I'm animating with Flash CS3, and there are two reasons for that. First of all, hopefully I can make the point that it doesn't matter what software you're using, it doesn't really matter what kind of medium you're even animating in, be it CGI or clay or 2D like this, and it really doesn't matter what version of Flash you're using. These are all universal animation principles that will apply no matter what. The second reason that I'm not using CS6 anymore is because my trial ran out, which I probably should have seen coming because they do only last a month and they do tell you how long you have left every time you log in. But if people complain about it and there's a big hoo-ha, then I'll switch back to CS6. But in the meantime, let's jump into animating jumps. Okay, so we're going to do something a little bit different today. And I'm going to try and animate pretty much everything in real time. A few people have complained about the sped up footage that I use when I'm sort of animating and in-betweening and doing things like that. And if they think that it'll be more beneficial that I actually show everything in real time, then there's no reason why I can't do that. So we've got this sort of little chubby character here that very closely resembles myself, and we're going to have him sort of jump up into the air and then land again in an arc like that. Now, you would be forgiven if you're an animator for doing something which is ultimately, I think, one of the biggest holes that people fall into with their animation, where they simply animate the action. They don't think about the before and they don't think about the after. You would be forgiven if you simply had the character just sort of jumping into the sky like that, even if you followed a nice arc, and just immediately going into drawing those frames. But you would be a terrible person for doing that. Not really. It's an easy hole to fall into. Instead, we're going to look at the animation, anticipation, action, and reaction of an animation. And what I mean by that is simply telling somebody that we're going to do something, doing it, and then telling them we've done it. It's a great way through just exaggerating acting and the sort of dynamic movement of the character. We can help sell our movements and really communicate to people what the character is doing. So before he jumps up into the sky, I'm instead going to have the character duck down again. And we've looked at this a little bit in animating the take, where the character's head goes down before he goes up, and this is a really important thing to learn. I suppose that for a jump it's even more important because the character is kind of winding up before he shoots into the air, and this isn't totally cartoony. People do this in real life. If you watch any kind of athlete or anyone jumping really, they will usually go down and sort of build up that momentum before they spring into the air. So here's the anticipation. It's the character bobbing down before he shoots up, and I'm going to have the character shoot up into the sky here. He's doing quite a jump, and so therefore I've got the legs stretching, this leg anyway, his right leg is stretching. I think we're going to have this left leg here, his left, not our left, this leg here sort of lift up into the air and have his hands sort of drag too. They're going to be fairly heavy. And then the next frame that we're going to do, not the next frame in the sequence, but I'm sort of just drawing extremes here, I guess. Or, actually, let's go with a breakdown next. This is an extreme because he's pretty much reached about as high as he's going to go. I want the character to begin to fall down, but have the body sort of finally catch up and have those legs, or at least the left leg, begin to sort of hook into his body and kind of curl up at the bottom there. Have the hands catch up as well. This doesn't look particularly fantastic. And then he's beginning to land again, and as he's landing, I'm going to have that, actually I'm going to have the right leg of his stick out. And again, those hands are going to drag just a little bit, I think. Okay, let's see how this is going. One thing, it can be really difficult to keep your characters on model when you're animating, and what that means is, does it look consistently the same all the way through? I think the word or the phrase on model comes from character model sheets, which is really just another phrase for turnarounds, which we looked at briefly last week. And I'm a little bit worried about the shrinking size of this character's head here, but that's pretty consistent. Now, I'm going to have him land. Actually, let's draw his final position when he's landed. It's going to be pretty similar, I think, to the first position that we see him take at the very beginning of the cartoon. Made him a little bit tall there, actually, a little bit too thin in the legs. So let's make him a little bit more squat. Okay, this is going to be his final position, but we've got the anticipation with the character heading down to begin with before he goes up. We've got the action itself, which is the character going up into the air and then landing. And I'd say that, yeah, the anticipation is the character going down, and action itself is pretty much the entire movement that the character follows as he goes up into the air and then lands. But the reaction comes after. And if you've ever seen somebody do a big jump or a big sort of athletic feat in real life, it can take a lot out of them. And as he lands back here on the ground, I don't want him to just immediately find that pose. Instead, I'd like him to really hammer down hard into the floor. And in a way overshoot his mark. But I think it's more the weight of his body hitting the floor that's causing this. And instead we get a nice kind of springy sort of effect. So we have the anticipation, action, and reaction here as he hits the floor. Okay, so here is our rough animation. Obviously we have a lot of work to do in terms of cleanup, but we also need to add in-betweens and retime the whole thing because it's very quick right now. And I'll do that in real time while talking you through some more of the anticipation, action, and reaction. Wow, animating this and cleaning it up in real time, eh? I'm going to have to be quick. Okay, what I'm going to do is set this layer here to have just a very dark grey outline. Which will make it easier for me to draw on above. And first of all, I'm going to set just a few fresh keyframes for me in the layer above and clean them up. And I'm going to do my cleanup and then do my in-betweens based only on the cleanup and go straight into cleanup without roughing out all the in-betweens to begin with. Which is a way that I like to work, and you might have noticed that before because I think I did some of that in the last lesson that we had. But if people need to rough out all of their drawings and only do the cleanup when all of their in-betweens have been roughed out, that's absolutely fine. It just happens to save time for me to clean up beforehand. Okay, so we've got to get through this quickly, man. Okay, so he has 3 fingers. This character design is sort of evolving as I go. Okay, so we've got a first little extreme here, and as he goes down, the arms are going to coil up here, and the legs are going to bend. And what we're really doing is treating the human body like a spring, and like I say, this is something that happens in real life. You'll see it. anytime somebody is about to exert themselves, they kind of wind up beforehand, and this helps for them to sort of get the strength that they need. As the knees bend here, it's going to make it much more powerful when they suddenly straighten out, and it's going to mean that there's a lot more momentum behind the jump. And that is really all part and parcel for the idea of anticipation, action, and reaction. I'm also going to have his eyes screw up a little bit here, like he's sort of just concentrating all of his energy before he explodes out with it. Okay. Hand's a little bit gimp, but whatever. Right, this shot up here, I'm having these arms stretch out because, of course, they're sort of heavy, and the force of being pulled upward so suddenly by the legs and the sort of shoulders is stretching them out. Same for his right leg, that's dragging behind. And I'm really just elongating the entire shape of the character here. A lot like when we looked at the bouncing ball in episode 2, the way that that stretched out as the ball shot into the air after bouncing off the ground. The arms are beginning to coil up again because the inertia of the jump has sort of caught up with them. But also, I think that in the character's mind, he's probably preparing himself for landing back down on the ground when the jump is over. And these legs are catching up as well. Again, it's sort of like that hierarchy of movement that we looked at in earlier episodes, because I'd say that even though the feet were the most important factors in actually propelling him off the ground, I'm going to say that the body now is really sort of carrying the character, and it's only as he's starting to land here that the feet come back into play. The feet sort of are a little bit floppy here on this frame for the time being, and then they shoot back out and actually come back into play as the character hits the ground here. So we're still animating the action here, we're still animating the actual jump, but when that character hits the ground, I'm going to say that we're back into animating reaction. Short little arms there. His head is slightly stretched again on this frame because he's sort of now being pulled down by gravity. That nose too. Now he's really slammed down here hard on the ground. So, boy, I'm having to do this so quickly. He's almost squashed like a ball. He's almost completely flat. And then finally we have his starting position again, which actually I'm just going to borrow here from the first frame and copy and paste it, which is the lazy way to do things, but whatever, I'm kind of against it here with time. Okay, clean frames, let's get this sucker in between and fix that timing. Okay, so I'm going to get cracking here on adding an in-between here after the character's first pose and before he goes down into his sort of crouch. Now, we could get clever and add a breakdown, but I don't think it's necessary right about here, because we've already got quite a dynamic movement, so I'm not going to bother too much with breakdowns today. But this is really going to give our movement a lot more impact, believe it or not, just to drag out this initial movement of the character crouching down. And that's something I'd like you to remember. Oftentimes, to give your animation impact, it's equally as important to worry about the before and after as it is to worry about the movement itself. For example, if you had a character getting punched in the face, what's really going to make that punch look powerful is the wind-up beforehand and the reaction after, and not just of the character throwing the punch, but also the person receiving the punch. Their action, or their reaction we should say, is going to really help sell the impact of that punch. Now I've added one in between here, but I'm going to add a second one in directly after it and have this wind up, or wind down? I feel odd calling it a wind up when he's crouching down, but anyway, to have this anticipation look even more dramatic. Oh, in-betweening. It's not a fun job, I tell you that. That's why it's sort of the job that most animators get when they're just starting out on the bottom rung. It's not a fun job. Because as you can see, the creativity now has kind of been sapped out of the project. If I was giving this to somebody else, I wouldn't let them just do as many or as few in-betweens as they felt necessary. I'd tell them, I'd say, you know, give me 4 in-betweens there, give me 2 there, 3 there, whatever. And it's at that point that the job becomes pretty tedious and not too creative. So let's add an in-between here as the character begins to leave the ground. And that's a very quick movement as he leaves the ground, so I'm just going to probably place in one directly in the middle, with those arms beginning to stretch out. And that leg stretching as he leaves the floor. Okay, I forget if I've drawn that mouth on every frame. I may not have done, but I think we'll be alright. And let's actually have the arm stretched out a little bit further. And here, when he's up in the sky, I actually want to drag out this middle portion of the movement as the body sort of slows down a little bit in the air. Again, refer to our bouncing ball if you'd like to see why. And quickly I'll just add in a sort of straight in between of the hands catching up. As you can see, the drawing is suffering a little bit, and that is naturally because I'm trying to do this all in real time for you, but also I don't think that people should stress so much about the drawing, especially when you're doing an in-between. Drawing is hugely important in 2D animation, but at the same time there are so many other things like arcs and timing and movement and all these other factors that can come into play that I don't want people to think that it's the end-all be-all and the only important part of their animation. Okay, so this is beginning to look a little better. I'll probably add in one more in between as he's crouching down here just to make that push it even further, but I won't do that just yet. And I'm going to add in another in between before the character begins to fall down. The arm straightening out here as he's falling. As you can see, these hands are just turning into like blobs with sausages growing out them because I'm trying to do this so quickly. I might not do this on the walk cycle now. I was going to do a walk cycle after this, and I'm starting to think, I don't want this episode to be 12 hours long. Okay, so let's have this leg kind of doing something like that. And this leg here is beginning to kick out. And I'm probably not going to have any in-betweens between here and here. I might actually just have that snap, which will look a little strange, but nice and cartoony, but honestly that snap might just really make it look nice and crunchy as he hits the floor. But I'm definitely going to add some in-betweens here as he finds his pose again. I'm even wondering if I could reuse the in-betweens from the very beginning as he's crouching down. In fact, we probably could do that. Let's see if we can. We're being complete cheats today. Let's see if I can use these in-betweens here. Copy them. Paste them. Let's grab the frames. Let's reverse the frames. Oh, of course, they're all on the other side, aren't they? Blimey. Blimey! Mr. Simpson! I'm going to have to stick them all over here. It's not quite right. The spacing of the feet isn't ideal, but we'll see if we can't fix it. Wow, Animation 101 here. Copy. Copy the work that you did somewhere else to try and save time. Okay, let's see how that looks. He comes down. Oh, that's a little fishy actually, because I've not quite moved them into place here. Oof, that's rough. Hang on. I'll just use one. There we go. I'll just use one. That didn't quite work out. But hey, sometimes you need to experiment, and if you can save yourself time with doing something, that can be very, very valuable. See, now I'm really teaching you guys animation. I'm showing you how to how to avoid making more work for yourself. That's really the... If you can find out a way to save yourself work without making your end results look too shabby, then honestly, you've learned something valuable there. Okay, so I'm just gonna stick a direct in between here. Just going to change the arm on this frame here, so it's not quite right for what we're doing. And add one last in between here, just as he's crouching down. Do this as quick as is humanly possible, like some kind of DC superhero. I'm moving faster than the speed of light, although it probably doesn't feel that way to anyone watching it. It probably feels very, very dull and mundane. Okay, and here we have the finished shot that I created. It's a little bit rough, so I actually took the liberty of slightly tweaking it, giving us this version, which has a few more in-betweens and a little bit more bounce at the end, but that's pretty much a shot that we've created in real time, making use of the anticipation, action, and reaction. And now, on to the walk cycle. Now, the humanoid, or two-legged bipedal walk cycle is one of those fundamental things that animators need to learn how to do as early on as possible, I think, because it's an incredibly important lesson. But it's a pretty tricky one, I'm not going to lie. It actually took me a heck of a long time, and you can be the judge of whether or not I've got that down yet. But basically, I think the most important thing that you can do as an animator in learning how people walk around on two legs is to simply get up out of your chair, or whatever you sat on, be it a pumpkin or a dwarf, and walk around and actually feel how people move and walk on two legs. And that's really by the body being off balance. You know, we don't have a perfectly straight character here, although you could do, potentially, but usually people are leant forward just a tiny bit and kicking out one leg after the other to actually catch themselves from falling too off balance, and then repeating that process with the other leg and carrying on indefinitely. So what I'm going to do is, using our very simple stickman character here, in real time as well, I'm going to try to run through how animation walk cycles actually take place and how you can apply that to your own animation. Well, we're going to rough this out, but we're going to really go ahead and do it straight ahead and not plot out our extremes. I think it will be less confusing in the long run, both for you and I, if I animate straight ahead. So we have our character here kicking out his leg to catch his balance. And this is going to happen on the next frame. His foot is actually going to finally catch him. In fact, sorry, I'm going to push things a little further and say that he's actually balance all of his weight now on that front foot. And just incidentally, I think it's probably worthwhile to say at this point that whatever foot is forward, that arm is going to be back. So if your right arm is forward, your left arm will be back. And if your right leg is forward, your left leg will be back, of course. But if your left leg is forward, your left arm will be back. If your right arm is forward, your right arm will be back. You're always sort of moving in locomotion where... I'm using the word locomotion a lot at the moment. Where whichever arm or leg is forward or back, the opposite arm or leg is going to be doing the opposite motion, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, we have our next image here of the guy putting his weight, balancing it on the forward foot here. Now I'm going to have his other leg lifting off the ground and beginning to completely remove itself from any contact with the ground because the weight is balanced here on the forward foot. And as he does this, the arms haven't done a whole lot at this point. The arms are still sort of trailing and following the shoulders, which is really driving that movement there for the arms. Now in our next image, the character is actually going to have completely put all of his balance on the foot that's on the ground and straightened that leg out. And this is typically called the up position, because at this point the character is at his or her tallest because the leg has been straightened out. So as you can see, our character is slightly taller here. Actually, you could do with being even taller still. There we go. And it's at this point that foot that had been leaving the ground previously is completely off and beginning to swing out forward to actually catch the weight of our character. And it's also at this point that our arms begin to change places as well. And finally, with the body moving back down slightly this time because the legs are bending. With the legs bending, we get a slight duck in where the character is going. The arms are beginning to cross over now here. That's difficult to illustrate with a stick man, but when we flesh out the character, you'll see how the arms have now crossed over completely. We're going to have our character kick out once more, and actually again we're going to reuse our very first frame. And I hope by reusing the first and last image here, I've shown you how the whole process kind of loops or cycles, I could say, to continue on the movement, but with the right arm and left leg and right leg switching places with each other by the end of it. For example, if we follow this left leg here and say that's kicked out and make that the left leg, if we follow it through the loop, you can actually see that by the end of the loop, that left leg has gone from being the front leg to the back leg. Now if we follow the right leg, for example, we can see that by the end of the loop, again, that has switched places. And by the way, I should probably tell you that I did take the liberty of adding in a quick in-between here on this second frame, but that's all. Now I think it would still need a few more in-betweens for the entire process to loop, but what I'm going to do is copy and paste what we've already animated and continue it on by just moving it onto the right of the screen and get our character to walk fully off screen before attempting to clean up that animation. Okay, so I've created incredibly rough animation here that we've just done with our Stickman character, so I think it's time to flesh him out, but I'm not going to do that in real time because, my lord, that would take far, far, far too long. So I will speed it up. Here goes. There we have our fleshed out walk cycle, which with a bit of a push we could turn into a run cycle. Hopefully I'll get to that by the series end, but that's all the time that we have for this week, folks. So join me next week where we look at character design, which should be pretty cool. In the meantime, I'm going to be left wondering what this guy is walking away from. I assume that horrible twist in Iron Man 3. Join me next time, folks. Bye-bye.